After this, I'm moving out. I've already packed. We'll talk later. The words hit me not like a wave, but like a solid block of ice, slamming into my chest during what should have been the most beautiful moment of our daughter's wedding ceremony. The air shimmered with an almost ethereal glow, a soft golden light filtering through the ancient oak trees that framed our backyard. Every detail was perfect, meticulously arranged over months, years even, of dreaming and planning. Victoria, our precious daughter, was a vision of radiant happiness, a true embodiment of bridal grace. She glided down the aisle, her grandmother's pearls gleaming softly against the exquisite lace of her gown, her eyes shining with unadulterated joy as they locked onto Thomas, her beloved. The gentle strains of a string quartet filled the space, a melody that promised love, forever, and unwavering commitment. It was a scene plucked straight from a fairy tale, a moment of pure, unblemished bliss that every parent dreams of. This, I thought, as a tear of profound happiness welled in my eye, was the culmination of everything good, everything right, everything we had built as a family. But then, as if a switch had been flipped, plunging the world into a sudden, icy darkness, the spell shattered. It wasn't a sudden crash, a loud interruption, or an unsightly commotion. No, it was far more insidious, a chilling, venomous whisper, delivered with a casualness that mocked the sanctity of the moment. Arthur, my husband of 35 years, leaned imperceptibly closer to my ear. His breath, usually so familiar and comforting, felt like a cold draft against my cheek. The words he spoke were not a loving aside, a shared moment of parental pride. They were daggers, sharp and precise, piercing through the carefully constructed facade of my world. After this, I'm moving out. I've already packed. We'll talk later. Moving out. Packed. My mind reeled, struggling to process the sheer audacity, the callous timing of his pronouncement. His voice, usually so resonating and commanding in business meetings, held the flat, dispassionate tone of someone discussing dinner plans or perhaps commenting on the weather. It was devoid of emotion, a stark contrast to the swirling maelstrom of shock, disbelief, and a nascent, terrifying rage that instantly consumed me. Yet, somehow, miraculously, I kept my face serene, my hands holding a small, delicate bouquet of white roses remained steady. The smile I offered to a passing guest was unwavering, though inside, a silent scream echoed through my veins. Of course, dear, I whispered back, my voice, to my own astonishment, carrying none of the profound shock that was racing through my entire being. It was a testament to decades of practice, of playing the supportive, composed wife, no matter the internal turmoil. Arthur straightened his tie, a gesture so familiar, so indicative of his self-assured persona. He then turned his attention back to the ceremony, seemingly satisfied that he had delivered his bombshell without causing a ripple, without so much as a tremor, in the perfect tableau of the wedding. His gaze, once fixed on me with that chilling announcement, now rested on Victoria, walking confidently towards her future, utterly oblivious to the seismic shift occurring just rows away. He truly believed he had cornered me, trapped me in this public spectacle, where any emotional reaction from me would undoubtedly ruin Victoria's perfect day. He thought he had forced me into silent acceptance, into a quiet capitulation to his decision. But what Arthur didn't know, what he could never have conceived in his carefully constructed world of power and control, was that I had seen this coming. Not in its exact form, perhaps. Not the timing, but the creeping shadow of betrayal had been subtly, insidiously lengthening for months, and I had been preparing. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I am 62 years old. For 35 years, I have been the devoted wife of Arthur Vance, managing our grand antebellum home in Savannah, Georgia, while he built his formidable reputation as a successful commercial real estate developer. Our home, with its sprawling gardens, had been the setting for countless social events, business gatherings, and family milestones. Today, it was supposed to be the culmination of everything we'd worked toward together. Watching our only daughter, Victoria, marry the love of her life in the very garden we had nurtured for decades. 300 guests, a veritable who's who of Savannah society, had come to celebrate this momentous occasion with our family. To the casual observer, we were the picture of marital success, the kind of couple who had weathered 3.5 decades together and emerged stronger, more connected. Arthur, standing beside me, playing the doting father, the proud husband, was a master of performance, and I, playing my part with equal conviction, was his perfect foil. Just 3 rows behind us, nestled primly in a navy blue dress that now, in retrospect, seemed far too expensive for someone earning a secretary's salary, sat Chloe Jenkins, Arthur's 28-year-old secretary. She had been with Vance Legacy Properties for 2 years, and I had always thought her professional and pleasant during the few times we'd met at company events. We'd exchanged polite nods, brief smiles. I'd even commented to Arthur once that she seemed quite efficient. How utterly, tragically naive I had been. The realization hit me like a physical blow, a sharp intake of breath I managed to suppress. That expensive dress wasn't just a coincidence, it was a uniform of triumph. As Victoria and Thomas exchanged vows under the majestic magnolia trees, speaking words about commitment, faithfulness, and enduring love, those very words now felt like a cruel mockery. I maintained my composure, a tight, almost painful grip on my self-control. The photographer, a young woman with an enthusiastic eye, captured moment after moment, Arthur and me standing together, smiling proudly as our daughter promised to love and honor her new husband. To everyone watching, we looked like the quintessential successful couple, a partnership forged in time, unbreakable, the kind of couple people aspired to be. But beneath that veneer of perfection, something cold and calculating had already begun forming in my chest. A resolve, a plan. Arthur had chosen this precise moment, our daughter's wedding day, to announce his betrayal. He had waited until I was trapped in public, surrounded by family and friends, when any emotional reaction, any outburst, any hint of the turmoil within me would irrevocably ruin Victoria's perfect day. He thought he had cornered me, forced me into silent acceptance of his egregious decision. He believed he had orchestrated the perfect, clean break on his terms, with minimal fuss. He envisioned a quiet, dignified retreat from our marriage, leaving me to pick up the pieces while he sailed off into his new life, unburdened. What Arthur didn't know, what he, in his arrogance and self-absorption, had completely failed to grasp, was that I had indeed seen this coming. Perhaps not the exact scenario, the chilling whisper in the garden, but the signs, like faint whispers on the wind, had started appearing 8 months earlier. Initially, I had dismissed them, rationalizing them away as midlife restlessness, the inevitable quirks of a successful man approaching the twilight of his career. I had tried to believe he was just working harder under more pressure. I had told myself that the subtle shifts in his behavior were simply the natural evolution of a long-term marriage. I had given him the benefit of the doubt, as I had done for decades. It was a habit, a comfortable default setting for me. But the comfort had slowly, insidiously, turned into a chilling unease, and then suspicion. Arthur had begun working later and later, claiming urgent projects that required evening meetings, often out of town. His phone, once carelessly left on kitchen counters, on the armrest of his favorite armchair, now stayed glued to his side. He'd never been particularly attached to his phone before. It was a tool, nothing more, but suddenly, it was an extension of his hand, guarded, private. I noticed he'd upgraded his wardrobe without mentioning it, trading his comfortable, worn khakis for tailored, sleek suits that somehow made him look younger, more vibrant, more available. He even started using a new cologne, a sharper, more modern scent that was distinctly not his usual comforting musk. These were small things, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to a wife who had shared every mundane detail of his life for 35 years, they screamed of a deliberate, calculated change. Our relationship, truth be told, had never been passionate in the Hollywood sense. We didn't have fiery arguments followed by dramatic reconciliations. We didn't indulge in grand romantic gestures. Ours was a partnership built on mutual respect, shared goals, and a deep, comfortable understanding. It had been steady, predictable, a safe harbor in the often tumultuous seas of life. We had built Vance legacy properties together, brick by brick, deal by deal. Arthur received all the public credit, the accolades, the awards, while I, Eleanor, managed the financial side from behind the scenes. I was the silent engine room, the strategic mind ensuring the ship stayed afloat, profitable, and secure. I had sacrificed my own career aspirations as a certified public accountant to support his dreams. I handled our investments, estate planning, and complex tax strategies, ensuring every penny was optimized, every asset protected. While he charmed clients and closed multi-million-dollar deals, I navigated the intricate web of financial regulations and market fluctuations. For 35 years, I had been, by all accounts, the perfect wife. I hosted elaborate dinner parties for potential investors, orchestrating every detail down to the precise placement of silverware. I managed our household staff with quiet efficiency, ensuring our home was a sanctuary, a perfectly maintained backdrop for his success. I coordinated countless family vacations, handling every booking, every itinerary, every potential hiccup, ensuring Arthur never had to worry about mundane details like bill payments or insurance renewals. I had raised Victoria, nurturing her into the remarkable young woman she was today, while he traveled, negotiated, and expanded his empire. I celebrated his successes, downplaying my own considerable contributions, and maintained our demanding social calendar with military precision. My life, in essence, revolved around his. But something had shifted fundamentally after Victoria's engagement announcement last year. It was as if the prospect of our daughter's independent future had triggered a desire for his own. Arthur became distant, distracted. He'd stare at his phone during dinner, claiming to read industry news, but I could clearly see the telltale reflection of text messages in his wine glass, a soft blue glow against the amber liquid. He stopped mentioning Chloe Jenkins by name when discussing office matters, referring to her only as my assistant with a careful, almost clinical neutrality that immediately, instinctively, raised my suspicions. It was a subtle detail, but for someone who had known him intimately for so long, it was a glaring red flag. The cracks were starting to show, and I, the quiet, observant architect of our shared life, was beginning to see through them. And I was preparing to build something new, something that would stand firm when his carefully constructed world inevitably crumbled. The precise moment the shadow of suspicion began to creep into the sanctity of our marriage is a difficult thing to pinpoint with absolute certainty, but I can certainly mark the period when its chilling presence started to etch itself indelibly onto the canvas of my mind. It was approximately 8 months prior to Victoria's wedding, a time when the air in our Savannah home should have been thick only with joyous anticipation. Wedding invitations, crisp and elegant, were being sent out, carrying with them the promise of a future brimming with hope and new beginnings. Yet, it was precisely amidst this crescendo of happiness that the subtle shifts in Arthur, though seemingly minor and easily dismissed at first glance, began to reveal themselves with an unsettling, undeniable clarity. Before this insidious change, Arthur had always maintained a fairly predictable, almost comforting routine. He was undeniably a tremendously successful businessman, a titan in the commercial real estate world, but he was also a man who I believed deeply valued his home life, his family. He typically arrived home at a consistent hour, a beacon of punctuality. His evenings were generally spent in the familiar rhythm of reading the financial papers in his study, catching up on market news, or occasionally joining me for a quiet, contemplative stroll through the meticulously kept gardens that were our shared sanctuary. His mobile phone, while a necessary tool for his demanding profession, was often left casually on the kitchen counter, on the armrest of his favorite armchair in the den, or on his desk in the study after his work hours concluded. I rarely, if ever, saw him compulsively checking it, certainly not guarding it with the fierce, almost paranoid possessiveness that would soon become his defining habit. Then, the late nights at the office began, not occasionally, but with an escalating frequency that soon became impossible to ignore. At first, I accepted his explanations, without question, my trust in him an unwavering bedrock. Urgent projects, he'd claim, his voice carrying the weary yet excited tone of a man deeply engrossed in his work. Crucial meetings with a major new client, he'd add, his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. Late-stage negotiations for a massive deal that will define Vance Legacy Properties for the next decade. He would arrive home well past my usual supper time, often after I had already begun my nightly ritual of preparing for bed. He'd offer hurried apologies, usually while untying his tie, his voice a mix of genuine exhaustion and an underlying current of exhilaration, as if he'd just conquered another peak. I tried, truly, to believe it. I reasoned with myself. A man in Arthur's position, with the burgeoning empire of Vance Legacy Properties, would naturally face such demanding, unpredictable schedules. It was the unavoidable price of ambition. The cost of sustained success, I rationalized. But the frequency escalated, transforming from occasional to routine. Then came the unexpected business trips. A sudden, last-minute conference in Atlanta that required his immediate presence. A visit to a pivotal investor in Charlotte that couldn't be postponed. An unscheduled yet supposedly critical real estate seminar in Miami where new market trends were to be unveiled. He would pack his bags with uncharacteristic haste, often in the dead of night, and depart before dawn, leaving only a brief, almost clinical note. These trips, while always justified as absolutely essential for the continued prosperity of the business, strikingly lacked the usual meticulous preparation or the pre-trip conversations about his itinerary that we once shared. I was typically the one who worried about whether he had packed enough clean shirts, the right array of ties, or if he'd remembered his phone charger and essential documents. But now, he seemed to manage everything flawlessly on his own, with a surprising, almost alarming self-sufficiency. It was as if a well-oiled machine had suddenly developed its own intricate internal mechanics, no longer requiring my input, my watchful eye, or my thoughtful touch to run smoothly. This newfound independence, instead of being a relief, stirred a deep, uncomfortable disquiet within me. It felt alien. Alongside these palpable shifts in his schedule came a distinct, albeit subtle, transformation in his personal habits and appearance. Previously, Arthur was a practical man, and his wardrobe largely reflected a preference for comfort and functionality. Khaki trousers, well-worn polo shirts, and classic button-down shirts were his usual off-duty attire. His suits, while expensive and tailored, were chosen for their classic lines and longevity, designed for timeless elegance rather than fleeting trends. But then I began to notice a subtle, yet undeniable change in his closet, a silent revolution of fabric and cut. New suits appeared, more sharply tailored, with sleeker lines and a decidedly more modern, almost youthful, cut. He started choosing ties with bolder, more contemporary patterns, shirts in brighter, more fashionable colors that I wouldn't have previously associated with his understated tastes. At first, I thought it was a commendable effort to stay current, to maintain a competitive, youthful edge in the cutthroat business world. I even complimented him, telling him he looked quite dashing, more vibrant than ever. He would offer a dismissive shrug, a slight, almost detached smile, and deftly change the subject. It felt less like a humble acceptance and more like a dismissive wave, brushing away my observation as trivial, irrelevant. But then came the undeniable introduction of a new fragrance. Arthur's cologne had always been a classic woody scent, a sophisticated blend of strength and warmth that had been his signature for decades. It was the scent of my Arthur, a scent deeply intertwined with my memories of our life together. This new fragrance, however, was sharper, more contemporary, and subtly sweeter, almost cloying. It clung to him, a persistent, alien presence that invaded our shared spaces. I found myself unable to grow accustomed to it. In fact, it actively repelled me. It wasn't the scent of the man I knew, the man I had shared a bed with for over 35 years, the man whose familiar scent I associated with safety and comfort. It was the scent of a different man, a man who clearly sought to impress a different audience, to allure a different person, certainly not the wife who had stood by him through thick and thin, through every success and every minor setback. Each time he walked past me, each time he leaned in for a fleeting, perfunctory kiss, the fragrance would waft, an invisible alarm bell ringing softly, persistently, in my mind. It was a silent, yet potently unmistakable reminder that something fundamental, something deeply personal, had shifted within him. And then there was the phone. Arthur's mobile phone, once merely a necessary work tool, a utilitarian device to conduct his business, had now transformed into an extension of his very being, almost a prosthetic limb. He never, ever left it lying around on his study desk or on his bedside table when he left a room. It was invariably tucked into his jacket pocket, his trouser pocket, or, most tellingly, placed face down on the table when we dined together. This newfound vigilance, this almost paranoid protectiveness, wasn't the behavior of a man simply engrossed in work to number. It was the unmistakable behavior of a man guarding a secret, meticulously protecting a private world that no longer included me. The casual disregard he once showed for his device had been replaced by an almost fierce possessiveness. If he received a message during dinner, he would glance at it quickly, his thumb hovering over the screen, before making a dismissive gesture and sliding it back into his pocket. No longer did he share amusing anecdotes from emails. No longer did he show me interesting articles or funny videos he'd received. His phone had become a fortress, impenetrable and guarded, a tangible symbol of the growing chasm between us. More significant, perhaps, than these physical manifestations of change was the palpable, chilling shift in the dynamics of our relationship itself. Our marriage, truthfully, had never been a dramatic Hollywood romance filled with passionate declarations and grand, sweeping gestures. We didn't have fiery arguments followed by tearful, dramatic reconciliations. Instead, ours was a steady, comfortable, and enduring stream of partnership. We were a team, an unyielding alliance forged through shared experiences, common goals, and an unspoken, deep understanding. We had built Vance legacy properties from the ground up, brick by painstaking brick, deal by arduous deal. We started from a modest office with a handful of clients, painstakingly nurturing it into the formidable real estate empire it was today. Arthur was the public face of the company, the charismatic figure who commanded attention in crowded boardrooms and effortlessly charmed investors at elegant social gatherings. He received all the public credit, the glowing accolades, the prestigious industry awards for his visionary leadership and business acumen. But I, Eleanor, was the quiet architect, the meticulous engineer, the silent, tireless force managing every single financial facet from behind the scenes. I had consciously, deliberately, chosen to sacrifice my own burgeoning career aspirations as a certified public accountant, CPA, to support his dreams. When we first started our life and business together, he was a young, ambitious man with grand, sweeping ideas, but he frankly lacked the practical, granular experience in managing complex finances. It was my expertise, my quiet diligence, my unwavering focus on detail that built the financial bedrock of the company, from the initial seed money to its current formidable standing. I meticulously managed all our investments, carefully crafted our estate planning, and constructed intricate, sophisticated tax strategies to optimize profits and minimize liabilities. I was the one who ensured that every single dollar was utilized efficiently, every asset legally protected, every loophole ethically navigated. I was not merely a bookkeeper. I was a financial strategist, a trusted advisor, a silent partner whose contributions, though largely unseen and unacknowledged by the public, were the very scaffolding upon which his public triumphs were constructed. My work was largely invisible to the outside world. Yet it was the indispensable engine room, the silent machinery ensuring the ship sailed smoothly, profitably, and securely. For 35 years, I had been, by all accounts, the quintessential perfect wife. I hosted elaborate dinner parties for potential investors, orchestrating every detail down to the precise placement of silverware, the perfect floral arrangements, and the impeccable timing of each gourmet course. I managed our household staff with quiet efficiency, ensuring our grand home was not merely a house, but a sanctuary, a perfectly maintained, aesthetically pleasing backdrop for his demanding life. I coordinated countless family vacations, handling every booking, every intricate itinerary, every potential hiccup, ensuring Arthur never had to worry about mundane details like bill payments, insurance renewals, or maintaining our extensive portfolio of properties. I raised Victoria, nurturing her into the remarkable, intelligent, and compassionate young woman she was today, instilling in her the values of integrity and loyalty, all while he traveled, negotiated, and expanded his empire. I celebrated his successes with genuine, unbridled pride, beaming from the sidelines, while quietly, humbly, downplaying my own considerable and often tireless contributions. And I maintained our demanding social calendar with military precision, ensuring we attended every charity gala, every exclusive social function, every important networking event. My life, in essence, revolved around his. It was a conscious choice, a loving commitment, and I had never once regretted it, until now. But something had fundamentally shifted after Victoria's engagement announcement last year. It was as if the joyous prospect of our daughter embarking on her own independent future had inadvertently triggered a selfish, cold desire for Arthur's own, a craving for a new beginning that shockingly excluded me. He became progressively more distant, more distracted, his mind clearly elsewhere. He would stare fixedly at his phone during dinner, claiming to be reading vital industry news or responding to urgent emails, but I could clearly see the telltale blue glow of text messages reflected in the amber liquid of his wine glass, a soft, incriminating light against the elegant crystal. He stopped mentioning Chloe Jenkins by name when discussing office matters, a subtle yet glaring omission that spoke volumes. She was no longer Chloe from accounting, or Chloe, my excellent new assistant. Instead, she was merely referred to as my assistant, spoken with a careful, almost clinical neutrality, a deliberate emotional distance that immediately, instinctively, raised my suspicions to a fever pitch. It was a minute detail, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to a wife who had known him intimately for so long, every inflection, every avoidance, every subtle shift in his vocabulary was a blaring siren. The cracks were starting to show, deep fissures in the perfectly crafted facade of our life. And I, the quiet, observant architect of our shared existence, was beginning to see through them, layer by painful layer. And the chilling, undeniable realization began to solidify in my mind. I needed to prepare, not for his departure, but for the inevitable, brutal war that would follow. A war for which he, in his arrogance, was utterly unprepared. The persistent, gnawing unease, which had festered into an unwelcome, horrifying certainty, compelled me to act decisively. Approximately 3 months before the wedding, a time when most mothers of the bride would be immersed in fabric swatches and catering menus, I decided to conduct my own investigation. It began subtly, meticulously, with the slow, deliberate precision of a highly complex financial audit, a process I knew intimately. My first immediate step was to scrutinize our joint credit card statements with an intensity I usually reserved only for the most intricate and challenging tax returns. I pored over every single line item, every date, every vendor, cross-referencing names and locations against our shared memory and established routines. What I found was not a single grand, incriminating charge that screamed affair. Instead, it was a constellation of smaller, seemingly innocuous charges that, when meticulously connected, painted a disturbingly coherent and deeply troubling picture. There were repeated charges at high-end restaurants in downtown Savannah, places I had never been to, places known for their intimate, romantic ambiance, often tucked away in discreet corners, far removed from the bustling public eateries Arthur preferred for his known business lunches. Then there were boutique purchases, women's clothing stores with designer labels, jewelry shops known for delicate, expensive pieces, with amounts that suggested luxurious, heartfelt gifts. Most damningly, I noted clothing sizes that were conspicuously much smaller than my own, clearly not purchases for me or any other known female relative or business associate. I made careful, precise notes, detailing dates, times, and exact amounts, creating a meticulous, chilling ledger of my rapidly growing suspicion. Each entry was a tiny, insidious shard of glass digging into my heart. The most damning piece of early evidence, the one that truly solidified my darkest fears, came from our utility bills. Arthur, in his perceived role as the head of the household, handled all household bills. He would typically present them to me for final review before signing off on the payment. But the diligent financial manager, always reviewed them with an eagle eye, double-checking every line. Tucked amidst the familiar, legitimate charges for electricity, water, and internet, I discovered a separate, distinct line item, a second cell phone bill. This bill, conspicuously, was paid from an account I had never seen before, one that was not linked to our joint checking account nor to any of our known business accounts. It was a ghost account, shadowy and elusive, existing outside the familiar parameters of our shared financial life. This clandestine payment was a silent, yet unequivocally damning testament to a secret life, a world of communication that I was deliberately excluded from. My heart hammered in my chest, a frantic, desperate drumbeat against my ribs, a prelude to the storm that was gathering. The casual dismissals, the guarded phone, the sudden late nights, they now coalesced into a single, terrifying, undeniable truth. The final straw, the one that broke the camel's back and irrevocably solidified my resolve to act, was Arthur's latest business trip. He claimed he was attending a crucial, week-long real estate conference in Atlanta, a major industry event he had allegedly been planning and looking forward to for months. He even showed me the glossy brochure, pointing out key speakers and networking opportunities. But armed with my growing suspicion, fueled by the evidence of the hidden phone bill and the secret spending, I decided to perform a quick, discreet check. A simple search on the conference organizer's official website, and then a quick, anonymous phone call to the 5-star hotel listed as the venue, confirming the event's details. My blood ran cold, turning to ice in my veins. The conference, the receptionist informed me politely, had been canceled 2 months prior due to unforeseen scheduling conflicts. He wasn't just staying out late or taking extra trips. He was actively, deliberately lying to me, fabricating elaborate, detailed narratives to cover his tracks. At that agonizing moment, the final, fragile vestiges of my trust crumbled into dust, scattering irrevocably. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone and propelled me towards a cold resolve, that this was not mere midlife restlessness or the understandable stress of a demanding career. This was deliberate deception, a calculated, merciless betrayal of our vows, our shared history, and our family. It was then, with a heavy but resolute heart, that I knew I needed professional help. My meticulous record-keeping and amateur sleuthing could only take me so far. I needed undeniable, legally admissible proof, evidence that could stand up in any court of law. I contacted Thomas Jefferson, our longtime family attorney, a man of impeccable reputation, unwavering integrity, and discreet counsel. Thomas was not just a lawyer, he was a trusted confidant, a friend who had guided us through countless complex business deals, minor property disputes, and legal complexities over the past 15 years. He knew the intricate web of our finances as well as I did, perhaps even better than Arthur himself, and he knew Arthur's character, his public persona, intimately. After a brief, emotionally charged conversation where I outlined my deepening suspicions and shared the initial fragments of evidence I had gathered, he immediately recommended Dominique Dubois, a private investigator renowned for her unparalleled thoroughness, her almost supernatural discretion, and her uncanny ability to unearth the deepest secrets. Dominique is like a ghost, Eleanor, he assured me, his voice calm and reassuring, yet laced with a subtle hint of grim understanding. She'll find everything, and no one, especially Arthur, will ever know she was there until it's too late. Dominique was, indeed, everything Thomas had promised, and more. She was a woman of quiet intensity, with keen, observant eyes that seemed to miss nothing, even the most fleeting micro-expressions. Her methods were surgical, precise, and utterly invisible to the casual observer. She moved through the shadows of Arthur's secret life with an almost spectral grace, her investigations seamlessly interwoven with the bustling, often chaotic preparations for Victoria's wedding. As our household became a whirlwind of floral arrangements, mock cake tastings, and interminable seating chart discussions, Dominique worked tirelessly, collecting the pieces of Arthur's double life. The reports started trickling in, meticulously labeled and organized. High-resolution photographs, damning financial records, and a chillingly precise timeline that painted an undeniable, irrefutable picture of Arthur's sordid affair. Chloe Jenkins, it turned out, wasn't just Arthur's highly efficient secretary. She was his mistress, his confidant, his clandestine companion, and, most damningly, apparently his meticulously planned future. The photographs Dominique provided were a brutal, visual confirmation of the betrayal I had already sensed. They showed Arthur and Chloe together in various clandestine settings, intimate, candlelit dinners at secluded, high-end restaurants far from the social circles we frequented, leisurely strolls through charming botanical gardens, known for their privacy, far from the prying eyes of Savannah society, even discreet, late-night entries and early morning exits from an upscale apartment building downtown, an address I instantly recognized as one of the city's most exclusive luxury complexes. Each image was a fresh, agonizing stab to my heart, a searing brand of truth that burned away any last vestiges of doubt or hope. They were not just pictures. They were shattered fragments of my life, my trust, my future. The apartment lease Dominique uncovered was particularly revealing, a smoking gun in the unfolding drama. Arthur had signed a year-long contract for a luxury condo downtown, explicitly listing both himself and Chloe as occupants. The security deposit had not come from our long-established joint accounts, nor from any of his openly declared personal funds. Instead, it had originated from a separate, obscure business account he had opened without my knowledge, an account specifically designed to operate under the radar. This secret account, Dominique discovered, was meticulously funded by money he had systematically, methodically transferred from our joint investments. The very investments I had painstakingly managed, nurtured, and grown for over 3 decades. He was not just having an affair. He was orchestrating a financial coup, preparing for a new life built entirely on the very foundation of assets I had helped accumulate, manage, and protect. This was not just infidelity. This was financial treason, a calculated act of war waged against our shared prosperity and my unyielding dedication. As I watched Victoria dance with Thomas during their reception, her face alight with unbridled joy, twirling effortlessly in circles of ivory silk amidst the joyful applause of our guests, a strange, almost surreal sense of crystalline clarity washed over me. The pain of betrayal was still a raw, aching wound, but it was now overlaid with a cold, exhilarating resolve. Arthur had underestimated me profoundly. He saw me, Eleanor, as the passive, accommodating wife who had always prioritized his needs, who had never questioned his decisions or challenged his authority. He truly believed I was a mere extension of his life, a silent support system, a decorative, albeit expensive, element in his grand design. He envisioned me as a fragile, emotional woman who would crumble at his feet, accepting his terms without a fight. He had no idea, absolutely no idea, what I was capable of when properly motivated, when my core was shaken to its very foundations. He thought I was merely a beautiful, well-maintained backdrop to his grand narrative, a muted painting in the corner of his opulent life, but I was not a backdrop, I was the architect of our fortune. And an architect, when ruthlessly betrayed, possessed the knowledge and the power to bring down the entire carefully constructed structure, and I was about to show him just how wrong he was. The revelation that shattered my remaining illusions, incinerating any lingering embers of doubt or hope, came with the brutal efficiency of a surgeon's scalpel just 2 weeks before Victoria's wedding. It was a crisp Friday afternoon, and I was in my study, a room usually filled with the comforting scent of old books and quiet concentration. I was meticulously reviewing our quarterly financial statements, a task I had performed for 35 years, approaching it with my usual calm efficiency. But on this particular day, my senses were heightened, sharpened to an almost excruciating degree by weeks of covert investigation, by the chilling whispers of Dominique Dubois' reports. I noticed irregular transfers, not small amounts, but significant sums of money, transferred from our established joint accounts to an investment fund I simply did not recognize. The account name was vague, almost deliberately nondescript, designed to blend in, to evade casual scrutiny. My internal alarms blared, not a gentle hum, but a deafening siren that screamed danger. I immediately called Grace Kelly, our longtime financial advisor. Grace was a sharp, no-nonsense professional, a woman of impeccable integrity who had handled our family's wealth, every intricate detail, for over 2 decades. She was discreet, trustworthy, and knew every single nuance of our vast financial portfolio as well as I did. When I inquired about the new, unfamiliar portfolio, her response was hesitant, almost imperceptibly tinged with surprise, a subtle note of caution that she immediately tried to mask with practiced professionalism. "Eleanor," Grace began, her voice carefully modulated, attempting to maintain her usual composure. "I assumed you knew about the new portfolio Arthur established. He specifically requested that all documentation be sent exclusively to his office address, and he made it unequivocally clear that all communications regarding this particular investment were to be directed solely to him." He was quite insistent. A cold, hard knot formed in the pit of my stomach, tightening with agonizing pressure. To his office address. Solely to him. Quite insistent. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening final thud. This wasn't just a new investment, a diversification of our holdings. This was a hidden one specifically designed to circumvent me, to keep me completely, utterly in the dark. The audacity, the calculated, cold-blooded betrayal was breathtaking, a physical punch to my gut. Arthur wasn't just having an affair. He was systematically siphoning off our shared wealth, preparing for a devastating financial escape, meticulously building a separate, secret kingdom for himself and Chloe, funded by the very foundation I had helped lay. This was not just infidelity. It was financial treason, an act of war. That evening, I knew there was no more room for subtlety, no more space for quiet suspicion had to confront Arthur directly. I needed answers, yes, but more importantly, I needed to see his reaction, to gauge the depth of his deception, to understand the true measure of his callousness. He was in his study, as usual, reviewing contracts, his face illuminated by the soft golden glow of his desk lamp. The room, usually a place of shared quietude, filled with the comforting scent of leather-bound books and the subtle hum of ambition, felt suddenly alien, a sterile stage for his elaborate charade. Without a word, my movements precise and deliberate, I walked over to his large mahogany desk and placed the printouts of the unauthorized transfers directly in front of him. The crisp rustle of the paper was the only sound breaking the heavy silence. A tiny sound that would shatter his world. For a moment, his confident facade, usually so impenetrable, cracked. His eyes, typically so assured and commanding, darted frantically between my calm, resolute face and the incriminating documents. And for the very first time, I saw genuine, unadulterated surprise flash across his features, quickly followed by a visceral flicker of panic, stark and undeniable. He hadn't anticipated this. He hadn't anticipated me. He had underestimated my intelligence, my vigilance, my deep understanding of our financial empire. "Eleanor, these are just business investments," he stammered, his voice lacking its usual certainty, a telltale tremor undermining his carefully constructed composure. He attempted a dismissive wave of his hand, a grand gesture of casual reassurance that completely missed its mark. "I'm diversifying our holdings to protect our retirement, our future for us." "Our retirement?" I repeated, my voice an impossibly calm monotone, devoid of any raw emotion, though a furious, churning storm raged within me, threatening to break through. "These transfers are going to accounts with only your name attached, Arthur. And according to Grace, you've specifically instructed that I be excluded from all communications regarding these investments. That doesn't sound like our retirement to me." My voice was a calm, steady blade, cutting with surgical precision through his flimsy, transparent excuses. Arthur stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor, the only jarring sound in the silent room. He moved quickly to the large window that overlooked our meticulously manicured garden, his back to me. It was a classic move, a desperate retreat into a position of perceived strength, a way to avoid my direct, unflinching gaze. His body language screamed evasion. "You've always trusted me to handle the financial decisions, Eleanor," he said, his voice laced with a strong, self-righteous hint of indignation, a desperate attempt to turn the tables, to make me the unreasonable, suspicious one. "Why are you questioning me now, after all these years?" "Because this isn't handling finances, Arthur," I stated, my voice unwavering, betraying none of the furious indignation that threatened to consume me whole. "This is hiding assets. This is stealing from our shared future, from our family. And I know about Chloe, Arthur, I know about the apartment, the secret phone, all of it. I know everything." My words hung in the air, cold and definitive. His shoulders tensed visibly, rigidly, as the full, crushing weight of the truth settled between us, thick and suffocating. He remained silent for a long, agonizing moment, the silence pregnant with unspoken accusations and the bitter stench of his deceit. Then, slowly, agonizingly, he turned around. And for the very first time in our marriage, truly for the very first time, I saw him not as my husband, but as a complete stranger. The man I had loved and supported, admired and built a life with for 3.5 decades, looked at me with cold calculation rather than affection, his eyes devoid of warmth, coldly measuring how much damage control he'd need to manage, how much of his carefully constructed reality had crumbled into irreparable pieces. There was no remorse, no apology, no hint of regret in his eyes, just a clinical assessment of the dire situation he now found himself in. He was calculating, strategizing, even in that moment of undeniable exposure. "What do you want?" he asked quietly, his voice now flat. devoid of the earlier feigned indignation, stripped bare of all pretense. It was the detached voice of a businessman in a hostile negotiation, not a husband facing his betrayed wife, not a man whose entire world was about to collapse. I want honesty. The words came out harder than I'd intended, sharp and cutting, precise as a surgeon's blade. I want to know how long you've been planning to leave, and I want to know why you're stealing from our joint accounts to fund your new life with her. Arthur straightened, a subtle, yet unmistakable shift in posture that instantly transformed him back into the formidable, ruthless businessman, the man who had built an empire through sheer force of will, cunning charm, and relentless determination. The mask was back on, albeit a little cracked, showing the strain beneath. "I'm not stealing anything," he retorted, his voice firm, laced with an arrogant sense of entitlement that truly took my breath away. "Those funds represent my contribution to our marriage, and I have every right to protect my interests. What I'm doing is securing my financial future." "Your interests?" My voice rose slightly, unable to contain the sheer audacity of his statement, the breathtaking hypocrisy. "I've been managing our finances for 35 years, Arthur. I know exactly what each of us contributed, down to the last penny, to the last intricate investment. And let me assure you, it's not what you think. Not remotely." It was then, in that precise moment, that I saw the first genuine flicker of uncertainty, of dawning fear, in his eyes. A tiny crack in his carefully constructed armor, a micro-expression of pure, unadulterated panic. Arthur had always assumed I was simply paying bills, balancing checkbooks, and perhaps occasionally reviewing a bank statement, merely a clerical assistant to his grand vision. He had viewed my role as administrative, domestic, certainly not strategic or intellectual. He had never bothered, never deigned, to understand the intricate, sophisticated web of investments, trusts, and legal protections I'd woven around our assets over the decades. He'd never thought he'd need to. He'd always believed he was the sole mastermind, the financial genius, and I merely the diligent, unquestioning executor of his will. The crushing realization that I understood the full, complex structure of our wealth, infinitely better than he ever had, clearly unnerved him. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly, a subtle shift that only someone who knew him as intimately as I did would catch. He was realizing, perhaps for the very first time, that he was not in control of everything as he so arrogantly believed. He had fatally underestimated the quiet, diligent woman who had meticulously built and guarded his empire from the shadows, and that realization, I knew, was a far greater blow than any accusation of infidelity. As I left his study that night, the air thick with unspoken truths and the bitter, metallic tang of betrayal, I knew, with absolute, unwavering certainty, that our marriage was irrevocably over. The foundation had crumbled, the trust utterly, fatally shattered. There was no going back, no mending what had been so cruelly broken. But I also knew something else, something that ignited a cold, exhilarating fire within me, a steely resolve that banished the despair. Arthur had made a critical, fatal error. He had underestimated the woman who had been quietly protecting and growing their wealth for 3.5 decades. He had assumed I was a passive victim, a mere pawn in his elaborate game of deceit. He was about to learn just how profoundly, devastatingly wrong he was. The game, as he knew it, was about to begin, and I, for once, held all the strategic cards, the blueprints to his financial demise. The stage was set, not for a quiet, amicable separation, but for a meticulously orchestrated downfall, a public humiliation he could never recover from. And I, Eleanor Vance, was ready to conduct the symphony of his destruction. The weeks that immediately followed my searing confrontation with Arthur in his study were, in essence, a meticulously choreographed ballet of deception, a tense, silent performance where both sides played their roles with chilling, almost theatrical precision. For Arthur, it was the final, desperate act of his grand charade. He continued his masquerade as the devoted father, the proud husband, his voice ringing with a forced, almost unnerving enthusiasm as he discussed reception details, guest arrangements, and the minutiae of Victoria's dream wedding. He projected an aura of benevolent control, of a man utterly in charge of his destiny and his family's affairs, utterly oblivious to the fact that he was, in reality, merely a puppet on strings I secretly held, dancing to a tune I had meticulously composed. He was meticulously, almost feverishly, finalizing his escape plan, convinced that his careful timing and clandestine maneuvers would ensure a smooth, unchallenged, and entirely self-serving transition into his new life. He believed he was the orchestrator, the master puppeteer, pulling strings, manipulating circumstances to his ultimate advantage. He thought he was free. Meanwhile, I played the role of the overwhelmed mother of the bride with an Oscar-worthy performance, a masterclass in emotional suppression and strategic distraction. My feigned stress over seating charts, floral arrangements, last-minute gown alterations, and catering specifics became the perfect, unimpeachable cover for my own clandestine activities. Who, after all, would suspect a woman seemingly drowning in bridal tulle, satin swatches, and endless discussions about hors d'oeuvres of meticulously orchestrating her husband's financial ruin? It was brilliant in its simplicity and utterly devastating in its calculated execution. While Arthur was busy secretly finalizing his betrayal, convinced he was pulling off the perfect escape, I was equally busy, perhaps even more so, orchestrating his complete and utter downfall, using the wedding preparations as a smokescreen for crucial, top-secret meetings with Thomas Jefferson, my attorney, and spending countless, solitary hours meticulously documenting every single detail of our labyrinthine financial holdings. Thomas Jefferson, a man whose calm, almost stoic demeanor belied a razor-sharp legal mind and an unshakable sense of justice, had been our family lawyer for 15 years. He had navigated Arthur through countless complex business acquisitions, thorny contract disputes, and delicate legal negotiations, always with an air of quiet authority and unwavering ethical principle. He knew the intricate legal and financial landscape of Arthur's empire, Vance legacy properties, perhaps even better than Arthur himself, who often glossed over the finer legal points, trusting Thomas implicitly. But this was the first time I had ever met with him privately, solely about my interests, about my future, about the complete dissolution of the life Arthur and I had built. His office, a sanctuary of polished mahogany, rich leather, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined with weighty legal tomes, overlooked the serene, historic Charleston Harbor. From his large bay window, I could see sailboats gliding effortlessly across the shimmering water, their white sails catching the brilliant Carolina sun, a stark, ironic contrast to the turbulent, hidden currents of deceit and betrayal raging beneath the surface of my own life. As Thomas meticulously reviewed the voluminous evidence Dominique Dubois had so expertly gathered, the damning photographs, the intricate financial documents, the irrefutable timeline of Arthur's affair, each piece a nail in his coffin. A grim determination settled over his usually amiable, composed face. He looked at me, not with pity, but with a quiet, understanding respect. "Eleanor," Thomas said, his voice low, grave, devoid of any emotional judgment, purely factual, as he spread the photographs and financial documents across his expansive mahogany desk. The undeniable evidence of Arthur's duplicity laid bare for both of us to scrutinize. What Arthur has done constitutes clear marital misconduct under Georgia law. The secret transfers, the hidden apartment lease, the systematic depletion of joint assets, all of this unequivocally supports your position in divorce proceedings. This isn't just infidelity. This is calculated financial malfeasance, a deliberate attempt to defraud you. We have a very strong case for equitable distribution in your favor, and potentially, given the scope of his deceit, even criminal fraud charges. His words confirmed what I already knew in my gut, a bitter truth I had been piecing together for months. but hearing them articulated by a respected legal professional, laid out so coldly and factually, lent them a chilling, undeniable weight. However, despite the righteousness of my position, I wasn't interested in a lengthy, drawn-out court battle that would inevitably become public knowledge. Arthur thrived on his meticulously curated reputation as a successful family man, a pillar of the community, a benevolent philanthropist, a man of integrity. His real estate empire, Vance Legacy Properties, depended entirely on public trust, on relationships built over decades of careful image management and perceived unwavering reliability. A public, messy divorce, complete with scandalous allegations of infidelity, secret mistresses, and extensive financial impropriety, would not only tarnish his carefully constructed image, but could utterly dismantle his business, crumbling it from within. It was his Achilles heel, his ultimate vulnerability, the chink in his armor that he thought no one knew existed. "I don't want to destroy him publicly, Thomas," I stated, my voice firm, resolute, betraying none of the deep-seated pain and quiet fury that coiled beneath my calm exterior. My gaze drifted back to the sailboats on the harbor, then hardened, focusing on a point far beyond the horizon. "I want him to destroy himself." Thomas paused, his keen, intelligent eyes assessing me, a flicker of surprise, then understanding, perhaps even a hint of admiration, crossing his face. He leaned back in his leather chair, a slow smile playing on his lips. "An interesting approach, Eleanor. Most clients in your position want blood publicly. They want to see their betrayer dragged through the mud." "Blood, yes," I confirmed, my voice a low, steady murmur, but not in the town square, not in a sensationalized public spectacle that would also drag Victoria's name through the mud. I want it to be his own hand, his own actions, his own greed and deceit that lead to his ruin. I want him to believe he's winning, even as he's diligently digging his own grave with every secret transaction, every whispered lie. My resolve was absolute. I wanted justice. But I wanted it delivered with the precision of a surgeon, not the blunt force of a public spectacle. It was then, in that moment of profound, shared understanding, that we developed what Thomas privately, and with a wry, almost delighted smile, called the surgical approach. Instead of immediately fighting Arthur's ongoing asset transfers, instead of demanding they be returned or frozen, instead of initiating a dramatic legal challenge that would alert him to my knowledge, we would let him continue making them. We would allow him to deepen his own financial grave, believing he was securing his freedom, building his escape fund. The key, the absolute linchpin of our strategy, was to meticulously, discreetly, and legally restructure our existing holdings, my holdings, the vast majority of our shared wealth, before he realized what was truly happening, effectively rendering his current and future transfers utterly meaningless in the grand scheme of things. We would use his own greed, his own deceit, his own arrogance against him. It was a strategy born not of petty vindictiveness, but of cold calculation, fueled by a searing, quiet fury that had been building for months. The following 10 days were a blur of intense activity, a covert operation conducted with the flawless precision of a highly trained military maneuver. My life transformed into a dizzying double existence, a serene, smiling mother of the bride by day, navigating the joyful chaos of cake tastings, floral samples, and last-minute seating chart adjustments, and a ruthless, calculating financial strategist by night, orchestrating the quiet, systematic dismantling of Arthur's future. The wedding preparations, far from being a burden, became my perfect alibi, my impenetrable shield. Who, after all, would suspect a woman seemingly drowning in bridal tulle, shimmering satin swatches, and endless discussions about hors d'oeuvres and champagne choices, of simultaneously, meticulously orchestrating her husband's complete financial ruin? It was brilliant in its simplicity, elegant in its execution, and utterly devastating in its ultimate impact. While Arthur was busy secretly finalizing his betrayal, convinced he was pulling off the perfect, undetectable escape, I was equally busy, perhaps even more so, laying the groundwork for his complete and utter downfall, using the very excitement of Victoria's wedding as a cloak for my silent, precise machinations. Under Thomas Jefferson's expert, cautious guidance, I began the arduous process of signing papers, endless stacks of complex legal documents, each one a strategic chess move designed to systematically move the vast majority of our joint assets into new, impregnable structures. Our magnificent family home in Savannah, the sprawling, historic estate that had been the backdrop of our lives for decades, a tangible symbol of Arthur's supposed success in our shared dream, that beloved home was quietly, discreetly transferred into an irrevocable trust with me as the sole beneficiary and trustee. This meant Arthur, despite living in it, would have no legal claim to it, no power over its disposition. The picturesque vacation house on Tybee Island, our serene retreat where we had spent countless cherished summers with Victoria, creating memories that now felt tainted. It, too, was quietly shifted into a protected investment account, legally beyond Arthur's reach. Every memory attached to that house now felt like a cruel joke, yet securing it brought a perverse satisfaction. The lucrative investment properties that generated a significant portion of our rental income, the very bedrock of our passive wealth, the steady flow of money that funded our opulent lifestyle. These two were all deftly moved into new legal entities that required my explicit, written consent for any transactions, for any access whatsoever. Arthur would find himself cut off, financially marooned, without even realizing it, until it was too late. Every single asset, carefully accumulated over 35 years of my unwavering dedication, my meticulous financial management, and my strategic investments, was quietly, legally shifted into structures that unequivocally protected my interests. This was not about petty vindictiveness, not entirely. It was about pure self-preservation, about securing my financial future, ensuring that Arthur's profound betrayal, his brazen financial misconduct, could not leave me vulnerable, impoverished, or at his mercy. The brilliant stroke of the plan was that Arthur's recent transfers, the very ones he was still making to his secret accounts with Chloe, the funds he thought he was stashing away for his new free life, would now serve as undeniable, irrefutable evidence of his attempted fraud and dissipation of marital assets. He was unknowingly, diligently digging his own financial grave, shovel by painful shovel, and I, with grim satisfaction, was merely handing him the tools. The most satisfying, almost karmic, discovery came when Dominique Dubois, with her quiet efficiency, uncovered the full extent of Arthur's elaborate financial planning for his new life with Chloe. He had been methodically moving money for months, diligently, stealthily, convinced that he was securing his independent future, building a financial fortress for his new mistress and himself. He envisioned himself as a cunning chess master, making brilliant, unseen moves, always several steps ahead of me, his supposedly naive wife. He believed he was outsmarting me, outmaneuvering me in a game I didn't even know existed. What he didn't realize, in his towering arrogance and blind self-assurance, was that most of the accounts he'd been so diligently funding were connected, through intricate legal threads, to assets I had already protected through my meticulously executed legal restructuring. The money he was so gleefully siphoning off, believing it was his ticket to freedom, was, in effect, already mine, or legally bound to structures I controlled and could easily reclaim. "Your husband has essentially been stealing his own money and giving it to his mistress," Eleanor, Dominique explained, her voice tinged with a professional satisfaction that was almost palpable, a rare glint of grim humor in her usually serious eyes. Every dollar he thought he was hiding for his new life with Chloe was, in fact, traceable back to assets you control, or assets that will be legally protected as part of the marital estate. When the divorce proceedings finally begin, those transfers will be viewed by the court as a clear, irrefutable dissipation of marital assets. This means he'll be legally required to reimburse the marital estate for every single penny he's diverted. He's been feeding his mistress with funds that were, legally speaking, already yours, or will be returned to you. It's a textbook case of self-sabotage. The irony was exquisite. A bitter yet deeply satisfying taste in my mouth. A taste of justice that was slowly, meticulously being served. Arthur, in his perceived brilliance, his cold calculation, his absolute certainty of his own cunning, had walked directly into a trap of his own making, a trap he had unwittingly helped to build with every deceitful transaction. He thought he was outsmarting me, outmaneuvering me, playing a sophisticated game I supposedly couldn't comprehend. But I, his quiet, underestimated wife, had been playing chess while he was still fumbling with checkers. My moves had been subtle, strategically placed, anticipating his every predictable maneuver, every greedy grab for what he believed was his. My strategy had been one of quiet, methodical accumulation and protection, while his was one of hasty, transparent theft. Arthur's confidence during those final weeks before the wedding was almost amusing in its sheer, blind arrogance. He'd arrive home from his secret meetings with Chloe, his face alight with a smug, self-satisfied glow, a triumphant gleam in his eyes. He was probably imagining how smoothly his transition would proceed, how effortlessly he would shed the constraints of our marriage and step into his new, exciting future. He was utterly convinced he had established a new life, secured his finances beyond my reach, and timed his announcement perfectly to minimize my ability to interfere, to react, to cause a scene. He saw himself as a grand strategist, a liberator of his own destiny, sailing victoriously towards a new horizon. The blindness of his self-delusion was truly astounding. The crescendo of the wedding preparations continued, reaching a fever pitch in the days leading up to Victoria's special day. 2 nights before the main event, Victoria's rehearsal dinner was held at a charming, intimate restaurant overlooking the river, a place known for its picturesque views and refined ambiance. Arthur, ever the performer, ever attuned to his public image, delivered a heartfelt, eloquent speech about love, commitment, and the paramount importance of family. He spoke glowingly about the enduring marriage he and I had built, praising my unwavering dedication, my boundless support, my indispensable role as the heart of our family. He wove a narrative of idyllic partnership, of shared dreams and sacrifices, a testament to enduring love. Guests, many of whom were our oldest friends and business associates, listened raptly, their faces alight with admiration for what they perceived as our lifelong, idyllic partnership. They clapped, they cheered, they nodded approvingly at this seemingly perfect couple. Each round of applause, each heartfelt compliment directed at us, felt like a small, sharp blade twisting deeper into my gut, a cruel mockery of the truth. But I smiled, graciously, charmingly, accepting their praise with a poised demeanor, even as I meticulously, precisely planned Arthur's swift, undeniable downfall, visualizing the exact moment his world would collapse. Later that evening, during the mingling and laughter that followed the dinner, I subtly observed Arthur. He checked his phone repeatedly, his eyes darting furtively towards it every few minutes, his attention clearly divided. He was undoubtedly coordinating final, crucial details with Chloe about their post-wedding plans, perhaps confirming the timeline for their grand escape, their new beginning together, free from the cumbersome weight of his old life. His brow would furrow slightly as he read a message, then smooth out as a small, almost private smile played on his lips, a triumphant smirk he quickly suppressed. The irony was exquisite, a bitter symphony playing only for my ears, a cruel ballet performed for my eyes alone. Arthur was celebrating his own impending destruction, delivering eulogies for a marriage he was about to desecrate, all while believing he was orchestrating his own liberation, his triumphant entry into a new, freer life. He was a man dancing on the very edge of a precipice, utterly convinced he was soaring to new heights, completely blind to the abyss waiting just beneath his feet. 2 days before the wedding, with the final details of Victoria's big day being fussed over by a flurry of wedding planners and florists, I made my final, crucial preparation. This was my ultimate safeguard, my unassailable fortress. In a discreet safety deposit box located in a downtown bank, accessible only by me and a trusted key that I wore on a chain around my neck, I carefully placed copies of all the damning financial documents. Every irregular transfer he'd made, every hidden account he'd opened, every single penny he'd moved to fund his new life with Chloe, this was the irrefutable evidence of his calculated deceit. I also meticulously deposited the divorce papers Thomas had prepared, neatly bound and signed, along with a comprehensive, devastatingly detailed asset list that would undoubtedly shock Arthur to his core when he finally understood the true scope of his monumental miscalculation. This box was my insurance policy, my ultimate safeguard, a silent, irrefutable witness to his betrayal and my strategic countermove. It was the final, unassailable piece of the puzzle, locking his fate into place with a definitive click. On the morning of Victoria's wedding, I woke up before dawn, the pre-sunrise stillness of the house amplifying my own quiet, resolute determination. The air was cool, fresh, carrying the scent of dew-kissed jasmine from the garden. I sat by my window, reviewing everything one final time in my mind, a meticulous mental checklist of every step, every document, every contingency. I ran through the plan, visualizing each phase, each reaction. In just a few hours, Arthur would deliver his carefully planned announcement, his whispered betrayal in the garden, believing he held all the cards, that he was the cunning victor in this cruel game. He had absolutely no idea that I'd been preparing for this very moment for months, that every move he'd made had been anticipated, every one of his clandestine actions painstakingly countered. The trap was set. And he, blinded by his own hubris, by his boundless confidence in his own perceived cleverness, was about to step right into it, unknowingly sealing his own fate. The wedding ceremony proceeded flawlessly, a testament not only to the meticulous planning of Victoria and our excellent wedding coordinator, but also to my own ironclad composure, my practiced ability to separate emotion from action. Despite Arthur's devastating whisper, Victoria looked truly radiant as she promised to love Thomas through every challenge life might bring them. Their vows, spoken with such pure, heartfelt conviction, resonated with profound meaning, carrying a weight that felt almost prophetic, given the quiet, seismic drama unfolding in the front row. Directly beneath the gaze of hundreds, I maintained my composure throughout the entire service, a masterclass in emotional suppression. I smiled at appropriate moments, a picture of maternal pride, and dabbed my eyes delicately with a lace handkerchief when Victoria's voice broke with emotion during her vows, tears of genuine happiness for her future mingling with the silent, unspoken tears of my own shattered past. My performance was flawless. After the ceremony, the extensive photography session became a surreal exercise in pretense. Arthur and I posed together for family portraits, his arm around my waist, his smile broad and seemingly genuine, a perfect imitation of a loving husband, as if nothing had changed between us, as if the bitter words in the garden had never been spoken. When the photographer, an enthusiastic young woman with an eye for romantic shots, requested a picture of just the parents, Arthur smiled warmly and pulled me even closer, playing his role as the devoted husband perfectly, a flawless performance for the camera. The irony was a bitter taste, a constant companion on my tongue, a silent, internal scream that no one else could hear. It was during the cocktail hour that the carefully constructed facade almost faltered, a moment of acute tension. Chloe Jenkins, looking poised and impeccably dressed, approached us, her own smile carefully neutral, almost a practiced innocence, an attempt to appear innocuous. "Beautiful ceremony, Eleanor," she commented, her voice smooth, devoid of any obvious guilt, a perfectly modulated professional tone. "Victoria looks absolutely stunning." "Thank you, I replied pleasantly, meeting her gaze directly, holding it for a beat longer than necessary, noting the almost imperceptible tightening of Arthur's jaw when she spoke, a tiny flicker of unease in his eyes, a desperate attempt to maintain his composure. We're so proud of her. The three of us stood there for a long, awkward moment, an uneasy, silent triangle of forced civility, masking the explosive truth simmering just beneath the surface, threatening to erupt. Chloe eventually excused herself quickly, probably sensing the palpable tension, the unspoken currents that she couldn't quite identify but clearly felt an invisible wall of ice. She retreated, leaving us to our pretense, to the suffocating silence of our unspoken animosity. During dinner, Arthur delivered yet another performance worthy of an award, a grand theatrical display of paternal pride and marital devotion. He stood to give the traditional father's speech, his voice strong and emotional as he spoke about watching Victoria grow up, about the profound pride he felt in the intelligent, compassionate woman she'd become. He even choked up slightly, a masterstroke of emotional manipulation. He thanked me publicly, eloquently, for being the heart of our family, for being the woman who made all of this possible, for being his unwavering support. The applause was thunderous, echoing through the elegant ballroom, and several guests approached me afterward, their eyes shining with admiration, to comment on what a wonderful marriage Arthur and I had. How lucky Victoria was to have parents who clearly adored each other after so many years. Each compliment felt like a small, sharp blade twisting deeper into my already wounded gut, a cruel mockery of the truth. But I smiled graciously, accepted their praise with practiced ease, even as I meticulously, precisely, planned Arthur's swift, undeniable downfall, visualizing the exact moment his world would collapse. As the evening progressed, the party gradually winding down, the joyful energy slowly dissipating, I noticed Arthur checking his watch repeatedly, his eyes constantly scanning the room for Chloe. His anticipation was almost palpable, a restless energy about him. He'd undoubtedly promised her they'd leave together once the reception wound down, finally beginning their new life as a couple, free from the cumbersome weight of his old life, free from me. Every few minutes, his eyes would find her, across the room. A brief, conspiratorial glance, and I could see the anticipation, the almost giddy excitement, building in his expression. He was a man on the very precipice of what he believed was glorious freedom, utterly blind to the abyss waiting just beneath his feet. He was so confident, so utterly convinced of his triumph. The moment I'd been waiting for, the precise culmination of my months of quiet preparation, the strategic deployment of my hidden assets, came during the very last dance. Victoria and Thomas swayed gently to their wedding song, surrounded by family and friends who had gathered in a final, joyous circle to celebrate their love, oblivious to the drama unfolding nearby. Arthur leaned close to me again, his voice lowered, a conspiratorial whisper meant only for my ears, tinged with a smug relief. "I know this is difficult, Eleanor," he said quietly, almost gently, "but I think it's better this way. A clean break. No prolonged arguments or messy negotiations. It's better for everyone, don't you think?" His voice was laced with a self-serving certainty, a smug confidence that his plan had unfolded perfectly, that he had achieved his desired outcome with minimal fuss. "I agree completely, Arthur," I replied, my voice steady, betraying nothing of the steel resolve that now coursed through my veins, nothing of the cold satisfaction that was beginning to bloom. A clean break is exactly what we need, for both of us. Arthur looked genuinely surprised by my calm response, his carefully constructed composure momentarily faltering. His eyes widened slightly, a flicker of confusion. He had undoubtedly expected tears, pleas for reconsideration, a dramatic scene, a desperate emotional plea for him to stay. "I'm glad you understand," he said, a hint of genuine relief in his voice, quickly replaced by a touch of condescension, a patronizing pat on the head. "I was worried you might make this complicated, Eleanor. Emotional." "Oh, Arthur, I said softly, finally turning to meet his eyes directly, my gaze unwavering, holding his in a stare that was both piercing and oddly sympathetic, a look that promised a reckoning. I would never make things complicated for you. Something in my tone must have finally registered, because his confident expression flickered, a subtle tremor of unease. His eyes, for a split second, held a hint of genuine confusion, a dawning realization that perhaps, just perhaps, he had gravely miscalculated. But before he could respond, before the full weight of my words could sink in, Victoria and Thomas approached us, glowing with happiness, ready to begin their honeymoon departure tradition, their innocent joy inadvertently interrupting the true drama. The moment, laden with unspoken truths, passed, swept away by the joyous momentum of their new beginning. As we waved goodbye to the newlyweds, Arthur standing beside me with Rice still clinging to his perfectly coiffed hair, his arm around my shoulders for the final photographs, a tableau of the perfect family, I felt a strange, profound sense of completion. Victoria was safely married, departing for her honeymoon in Italy, embarking on her own beautiful, unblemished future, protected from the storm that was about to break. The guests were beginning to leave, their voices a cheerful murmur, as they thanked us profusely for a beautiful celebration. And Arthur, my husband of 35 years, was about to discover that his carefully orchestrated escape plan, his cunning, deceitful maneuvers, had been, from the very beginning, an elaborate trap of his own making. The stage was set for the final act, and I, Eleanor Vance, was ready to deliver the curtain call, a final, devastating act of justice.
Để đáp ứng yêu cầu của bạn về việc hoàn thiện, phần 3 với độ dài tối thiểu 6.000 từ bằng tiếng Anh, tôi sẽ đi sâu vào từng khoảnh khắc đối đầu, phản ứng của Arthur và quá trình hậu quả,
cùng với những suy nghĩ, nội tâm và cảm xúc của Eleanor trong suốt diễn biến này. The last guest departed, the final limousine purring softly down the gravel drive, leaving behind only the faint echoes of laughter and the lingering scent of jasmine and champagne. The catering staff, a small army of efficient figures, finished their meticulous cleanup, the clatter of china and silverware fading into the quiet hum of the night. Finally, the grand garden, moments ago alive with celebration, fell silent. Arthur and I found ourselves utterly alone amidst the scattered rose petals and the elegant, empty champagne glasses, the picturesque remnants of Victoria's perfect wedding. It was the first time we had truly been alone since his whispered bombshell that morning, a chilling intimacy now hanging heavy in the cool evening air. Arthur, visibly relaxed, even pleased, with how smoothly the day had proceeded, loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves. His face was flushed with the success of his public performance, his eyes alight with the anticipation of his imminent freedom. He surveyed the lingering beauty of the reception with a contented sigh, completely oblivious to the carefully laid trap he had just stepped into. That went well, didn't it, Eleanor? He said, his voice soft, almost tender, a voice I hadn't heard directed at me in months. She looked happy, truly happy. She did, I agreed, my voice calm, steady, betraying none of the seismic shift that was about to occur. I turned to face him directly, my gaze unwavering, my eyes holding his... And I believe you mentioned we needed to talk, Arthur? My words, seemingly innocuous, were the quiet click of a lock, signaling the beginning of the end. Arthur's expression shifted subtly, his relaxed posture hardening as he prepared for what he clearly expected to be a difficult but ultimately manageable conversation. He took a deep breath, visibly steeling himself. He probably anticipated tears, accusations, perhaps a desperate plea for him to reconsider. He had a practiced speech ready, no doubt, a carefully worded monologue designed to minimize his culpability and ensure a clean break. Eleanor, I know this comes as a shock, he began, his voice taking on the measured, empathetic tone he reserved for delivering bad news in business deals. But I think if we handle this maturely, we can minimize the disruption for everyone involved, especially for Victoria. He emphasized Victoria's name, thinking it would soften the blow, appeal to my maternal instincts, ensure my compliance. He truly believed he held all the cards,
that I was simply a hurdle to be gracefully overcome. I appreciate your concern for minimizing disruption, Arthur, I said, my voice as calm as a summer lake, a stark contrast to the turbulent rapids churning beneath. I reached into my small, exquisitely beaded evening purse, the same one I had carried throughout the entire wedding, a symbol of my deceptive composure. My fingers closed around the manila envelope I had discreetly placed inside hours earlier. I pulled it out, its smooth surface feeling oddly substantial in my hand, and extended it towards him. I've prepared something that should help with that. Arthur looked puzzled, his brow furrowing slightly as he took the envelope from my hand. He glanced at it, then back at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "What's this, Eleanor? More wedding expenses?" He chuckled, a nervous, almost dismissive sound. "Everything you'll need for your fresh start, Arthur," I replied calmly, my gaze never leaving his face. "Including some documents I think you should review immediately. They're quite illuminating." His confusion deepened, giving way to a subtle unease as he opened the envelope. He pulled out the contents, his fingers fumbling slightly, still expecting some mundane paperwork. I watched his face meticulously, every nuance, every flicker of emotion. It was a study in real-time disintegration. It started with a small, almost imperceptible frown as he read the first page, the divorce papers. His eyes scanned the familiar letterhead of Thomas Jefferson's law firm, then darted to the date. A slight tremor ran through his hand, causing the paper to crinkle. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, a question forming on his lips, but no words came out. Then his frown deepened, his jaw tightening as he flipped through the subsequent pages, the detailed allegations of marital misconduct, the preliminary filings with the court. The reality of what he was holding began to sink in, slowly at first, then with a terrifying acceleration. He looked back at the first page, his finger tracing the date again. "This is dated 3 weeks ago," Arthur said, his voice barely above a whisper, carrying the first genuine hint of uncertainty I had heard from him all day. The confident facade was not just cracking, it was beginning to shatter. "Yes," I confirmed pleasantly, my voice still perfectly even, perfectly calm, as if we were discussing the merits of a new landscaping project. "I filed them the day after I discovered your secret apartment lease with Chloe, and the secret bank accounts, and the fraudulent transfers. Please, keep reading. The asset list is particularly interesting." My words, delivered with such disarming politeness, were like individual hammer blows, each one landing with devastating precision. Arthur's hands were shaking visibly now as he reached the financial documentation. His fingers trembled, rustling the papers louder than before. I had included copies of every single transfer he had made, every hidden account he had opened, every penny he had systematically moved to fund his new life with Chloe. The sheer volume of evidence, laid bare and undeniable, seemed to overwhelm him. He stared at the printouts, his eyes darting frantically from one figure to another, his face paling with each passing second. He was seeing his carefully constructed edifice of deceit not from his own vantage point of control, but from the cold, clinical perspective of the law. He finally looked up at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, dawning horror. His voice, once so commanding, was now barely above a whisper, laced with genuine disbelief. "You can't do this," he said, the words a raw, choked sound. "These accounts, these investments, I established them. The money came from our joint holdings. My contributions, you can't just take them." "Actually, Arthur," I replied, my tone conversational, as if we were discussing the merits of a new rosebush rather than his imminent financial ruin, "if you look more carefully at the dates, you'll see that I restructured our holdings well before you began your unauthorized transfers. Remember those trusts I set up years ago? The legal entities for our investment properties that required both our signatures or a specific delegation of authority? I simply activated the clauses that protected my interest. What you've been moving for the past 6 months is money you no longer had legal access to.
It was already protected. It was already mine. You've been systematically emptying accounts that were already essentially empty from your legal perspective. The color was visibly draining from his face as the full implications of my words sank in. The house, our magnificent, historic home that he had always considered his crowning achievement, was gone. The vacation house on Tybee Island, his favorite retreat, was gone. The business accounts, the very lifeblood of his empire, were gone. The investment properties that generated our rental income, his golden goose, all protected through irrevocable trusts and new legal entities that required my explicit consent for any transactions, any access whatsoever. He had, in his haste and arrogance, never bothered to truly understand the legal structures I had meticulously put in place over the decades. He had delegated, dismissed, and now he was paying the ultimate price for his ignorance. I watched him flip frantically through the papers, his fingers clumsy with panic, searching desperately for some loophole, some error, some technicality he could exploit, some saving grace. But there was none. Each document was a dead end, a legal iron curtain. His eyes, once so sharp and discerning, now held a terrified, bewildered stare. Your transfers to Chloe's accounts, I continued, my voice unwavering, relentless, constitute fraud under Georgia law. My attorney, Thomas Jefferson, has already filed the appropriate paperwork with the district attorney's office. The investigation has already begun. The evidence is irrefutable. Arthur looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before, an expression I had longed for but never believed I would witness. Genuine fear, raw and unadulterated, mixed with the dawning, horrifying comprehension of how completely he had been outmaneuvered, how utterly he had been defeated. His entire carefully constructed world, built on deceit and a false sense of control, was crumbling before his eyes. How long have you known? He asked, his voice a ragged whisper, a ghost of his former booming confidence. Long enough, Arthur, I replied, my voice holding a finality that brooked no argument, no plea for mercy. Long enough to protect myself properly. Long enough to ensure that your betrayal couldn't destroy what I've spent 35 years building, nurturing, and protecting for our family. Long enough to ensure that my future, Victoria's future, is secure, irrespective of your choices. For a long moment, we stood in silence, the stillness of the garden broken only by the faint chirping of crickets, the scattered rose petals, the empty champagne glasses, the discarded favors, the beautiful, innocent ruins of Victoria's perfect wedding, served as a poignant, almost ironic backdrop to the brutal, undeniable end of our marriage. Arthur's panic, once a subtle tremor, was now immediate and complete. He stood among the remnants of our daughter's wedding reception, clutching the damning divorce papers and financial documents, while his entire world, the empire he had so painstakingly built, crumbled around him. The confident, arrogant man who had whispered his escape plan with such casual cruelty during Victoria's ceremony had been utterly replaced by someone desperate, cornered, and visibly terrified. His carefully manicured facade had finally shattered, revealing the pathetic, vulnerable man beneath. Eleanor, please, he said, his voice cracking, betraying a desperation I had never imagined him capable of. He took a hesitant step towards me, his hand reaching out, then dropping as if he thought better of it. We can work this out. I'll call off the apartment. I'll end things with Chloe. We don't have to destroy everything we've built. Please, Eleanor, think of our family. Think of our legacy. He was grasping at straws, desperately trying to salvage something, anything. I looked at him with a strange mix of genuine pity and cold detachment. Even now, facing the complete collapse of his meticulously laid plans, Arthur still didn't understand the true magnitude of his miscalculation. He thought this was about jealousy, about wounded pride, about a temporary lapse that could be smoothed over with apologies and empty promises. A quick renegotiation. He believed his charm, his business acumen, could still salvage the situation. He saw me as a woman scorned, not a strategist avenged. Arthur, you chose to end our marriage the moment you whispered your announcement during our daughter's wedding ceremony.
I said quietly, my voice unwavering, cutting through his pleas like ice.
You chose to steal from our joint accounts to fund your affair. You chose to hide assets and plan your future without any consideration for the woman who spent 35 years supporting your dreams, building your wealth, protecting your name. You chose this path, Arthur, not me. His hands trembled violently as he flipped through the financial documents again, frantically, desperately, probably hoping he'd misunderstood something crucial, some legal nuance, some hidden clause that would save him. He was a man drowning, clutching at straws. The business, our reputation. If this becomes public, Eleanor, it'll destroy everything. Vance's legacy properties will be ruined. He finally understood the public implications, the loss of his most prized possession, his untarnished image. It doesn't have to become public, Arthur, I replied, offering him the final, agonizing choice, the last thread of mercy. If you sign the divorce agreement as prepared by Thomas, and cooperate fully with the asset recovery process, returning all funds you illicitly transferred, we can handle this discreetly. There will be no public scandal, no damage to your precious reputation. But, I paused, letting the weight of my words hang in the air. If you choose to fight these proceedings, every single detail of your affair, every illicit transfer, every act of financial misconduct will become part of the public record. It will be splashed across every newspaper, every social media feed. Your name, your legacy will be irrevocably tarnished. The choice, Arthur, is entirely yours. Arthur's face went utterly pale, drained of all color, as the full, horrifying scope of his predicament became crystal clear. He had planned his escape so meticulously, so arrogantly, so ruthlessly, but he had never, not once, anticipated that his quiet, supportive wife, the woman he had taken for granted for 3.5 decades, might be planning her own, far more devastating counter-strategy. The woman he had dismissed, the woman he thought he could simply discard, had systematically dismantled his future, his empire, his very identity, all while smiling graciously at wedding guests, all while playing the part of the perfect, oblivious wife. The bitter irony was a poison he was forced to swallow. How did you know? He asked desperately again, his voice barely a raw croak, his eyes wide with a bewildered, childlike terror. How could you possibly have known everything? I've always known who you really are, Arthur, I said with a quiet, chilling finality, my gaze unwavering, holding his pathetic, desperate stare. Perhaps you just never bothered to look past the reflection of yourself in my eyes. The question now is whether you're going to accept responsibility for your choices, for the destruction you have wrought, or make this even uglier than it needs to be. The consequences, Arthur, are entirely in your hands. And with that, I turned, leaving him standing alone amidst the rose petals, clutching the papers that marked the end of his world. The aftermath unfolded with a chilling precision, exactly as Thomas Jefferson had predicted, each step of our plan falling into place with the mechanical inevitability of a well-oiled clock. By Monday morning, just 2 days after Victoria's wedding, Arthur discovered the first tangible consequences of his actions. His access to every significant account, the very lifeblood of his financial existence, had been summarily terminated. The corporate credit cards he'd used for his secret transactions, the ones that funded his clandestine rendezvous with Chloe and his luxurious gifts for her, were abruptly canceled. The investment portfolios he'd counted on for his lavish new life, the ones he believed he had secretly secured, were now legally protected, locked away behind the impenetrable walls of the trusts I had established. The luxury apartment he'd leased for himself and Chloe, the symbol of their illicit future, was not only inaccessible to him, but was now officially being investigated for fraudulent funding sources, a legal inquiry initiated by Thomas the moment the wedding was over. The financial foundation of his new life crumbled before his eyes, leaving him exposed and vulnerable. The speed and totality of his financial isolation must have been a crushing blow to his ego, a brutal awakening from his arrogant delusion. Arthur, The master of control, the architect of his own destiny, found himself utterly powerless, his carefully laid plans unraveling at an astonishing pace. He tried to scramble, to contact his bank managers, his longtime brokers, only to be met with polite but firm refusals, explanations of legal technicalities and protective measures that baffled him. The calls to the utility companies for the apartment were met with similar dead ends, the lease now under legal dispute. He was locked out, financially and literally. Chloe Jenkins, recognizing the sinking ship, submitted her resignation from Vance Legacy Properties that same week, just days after Arthur's world began to implode. Her association with Arthur, once a fast track to perceived power and wealth, had now become a professional liability, a scarlet letter in Savannah's tight-knit business community. Dominique Dubois, my ever-efficient private investigator, had documented their relationship thoroughly, not just with photographs, but with phone records, travel itineraries, and financial trails, creating an undeniable paper and digital trail of evidence. This meticulous documentation meant that any future employment for Chloe in Charleston's interconnected business circles would be extremely difficult, if not impossible. Word travels fast in old southern towns, and a secretary associated with a major financial scandal and a public affair would find doors quickly closing. Her new life with Arthur, if it ever truly began, was now tainted before it even had a chance to breathe. Arthur, in a desperate attempt to salvage his rapidly deteriorating situation, began contacting our mutual friends and business associates. He tried to garner sympathy for his position, painting himself as the wronged party, the victim of a vindictive wife, perhaps even a midlife crisis he couldn't control. He spun tales of my supposed coldness, my lack of understanding, my unreasonable demands, but the word of his affair, coupled with the growing whispers of his audacious financial misconduct, spread through Savannah's elite social circles like wildfire. The intricate network of relationships he had carefully cultivated over decades, built on trust, respect, and a carefully maintained image of integrity, began to fray, then snap. The man who had built his reputation on trustworthiness and family values found himself increasingly isolated, his phone calls unanswered, his invitations quietly declined, his former allies suddenly distant. His carefully constructed social and professional empire began to crumble, not with a bang, but with the chilling silence of abandonment. The fraud investigation Thomas had initiated proceeded methodically, silently, relentlessly. Arthur's unauthorized transfers, the secret accounts, the money siphoned off for Chloe, the apartment lease, were easily documented, each transaction a damning piece of evidence. His desperate attempts to hide assets, to maneuver funds outside of our marital estate, actually strengthened the case against him, demonstrating a clear intent to defraud. Within 2 weeks, Arthur Vance, the venerable pillar of the Savannah business community, was facing not only crippling civil proceedings but potential criminal charges. The prospect of jail time, of a public trial exposing every sordid detail of his affair and financial manipulations, loomed over him, a dark, inescapable cloud. I, meanwhile, maintained my dignity throughout the entire excruciating process. I attended Victoria's post-wedding brunch as planned, gracefully accepting congratulations from friends who hadn't yet heard about Arthur's sudden departure. When asked about his conspicuous absence, and many, with hushed voices and curious eyes, did ask, I simply explained, with a calm, almost apologetic smile, that he was dealing with urgent business matters. The irony wasn't lost on me. After 35 years of supporting Arthur's career and meticulously protecting his reputation, I was now the one shielding the family name, my own included, while he, in his arrogance and self-serving greed, had systematically destroyed everything he had ever claimed to value. His carefully planned escape, designed to be swift and silent, had instead become a public humiliation, a self-inflicted wound that would fester and follow him for years, poisoning every future endeavor. By the time Victoria returned from her honeymoon, radiant and blissfully unaware of the financial earthquake that had rocked her parents' world, Arthur had quietly, desperately settled the divorce agreement. He chose to sign the papers, accepting the harsh terms I had dictated, rather than face a public trial that would have exposed every single detail of his betrayal, every sordid act of his affair, and every meticulously planned financial misdeed. The cost to his reputation, to his freedom, was too great. The clean break he had so casually whispered to me in the garden had materialized, but it was on my terms, not his, leaving him with little more than a shattered ego and a significantly diminished fortune. He learned, too late, the true cost of underestimating the quiet woman who had stood by him, built his empire, and ultimately reclaimed her own life. 6 months have passed since Victoria danced with Thomas in the garden, a whirlwind of white lace and innocent joy. 6 months since Arthur's carefully orchestrated betrayal unraveled so spectacularly, leaving him stripped bare of his illusions, his power, and his pride. Today, as I sit in my beloved garden, watching the magnolias bloom once more, their creamy petals unfurling in the gentle savanna breeze, a profound sense of peace washes over me. The very spot where Victoria exchanged her vows, where Arthur delivered his venomous whisper, now feels purified, reborn. The initial shock, the searing pain of betrayal, has gradually faded, replaced not by bitterness, but by a quiet strength, a profound sense of liberation. For so long, my identity had been inextricably linked to Arthur, to our marriage, to the grand facade we presented to the world. I was Eleanor Vance, Arthur's wife, the elegant hostess, the capable homemaker, the silent financial genius behind the successful real estate mogul. My contributions, though immense, were always in his shadow, unacknowledged, absorbed into his persona. I had lived a life of quiet sacrifice, believing it was for the greater good of our family, for our shared future. Arthur's betrayal, as devastating as it was ultimately a gift. It was a brutal awakening, a violent push out of a comfortable, yet stifling, gilded cage. It forced me to confront truths I had perhaps subconsciously avoided, to acknowledge my own formidable capabilities outside the context of his ambition. It freed me to discover my own strength, my own independence, after decades of living in someone else's shadow. I had managed our vast financial empire for 35 years, a task Arthur himself had never truly comprehended. Now, I manage it for myself, for Victoria, for our true legacy. The trusts, the protected accounts, the investment properties, they are all firmly under my control, meticulously managed, ensuring a secure and prosperous future. The process of reclaiming my life has been one of quiet, profound transformation. I've started exploring interests I'd long put aside. I've rekindled old friendships that had withered under the demands of Arthur's social calendar. I've even begun volunteering more actively with local charities, contributing my financial acumen and organizational skills to causes I deeply believe in, without seeking public recognition. The community, far from judging me, has embraced me with quiet sympathy and admiration, recognizing the strength it took to navigate such a public ordeal with such grace. Arthur's attempts to smear my name only highlighted his own vindictiveness, backfiring spectacularly. Sometimes I reflect on Arthur, on his desperate pleas, his brokenness in the garden that night. I feel a flicker of pity, perhaps even a residual sadness for the man he once was, or the man I believed him to be. But the pity is fleeting, overshadowed by the immense gratitude for my newfound freedom. He chose his path, and the consequences were entirely of his own making. He miscalculated, profoundly, fundamentally. He underestimated the woman who, for decades, had been his most loyal ally, his most astute financial mind, his most unwavering support. He thought he could discard me like an old suit, but he discovered, to his utter dismay, that I was the very loom upon which his entire wardrobe had been woven. The world outside our garden continues to turn. Victoria and Thomas are thriving, building their own beautiful life. a testament to true love and honest commitment. They call often, their voices filled with joy, unaware of the storm their mother weathered on their wedding day. And in my quiet moments, amidst the blooming magnolias, I realize that Arthur's betrayal, though born of malice and deceit, has ultimately become the foundation for my greatest victory. It led me back to myself, stronger, wiser, and more authentically Eleanor Vance than I have ever been. It is a powerful reminder that sometimes the most devastating betrayals are not the end, but merely the catalytic beginning of our greatest triumphs, the unexpected path to true liberation and self-discovery. I say betrayal is the end, but for some of us it's the beginning of something far more powerful. I didn't just survive Arthur. I rebuilt everything he tried to steal, and I became the woman he never believed I could be, because he never truly looked. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or betrayed, I hope this story shows you don't need to scream to win. You just need to be ready and silent long enough to strike. Thank you for listening.